Yeah, so I think first things first are the follow-up
Always a follow-up.
from last week, which was on cloud tools.
Yep.
Did you have anything?
A little bit. We were just discussing before we came on air about some. I've been doing a bit of cloud stuff with Google's Cloud, which I think in general is quite approachable, but be prepared to sink much more time than I'm used to with this stuff because I use the higher level tools. I've actually been tackling like a vaguely interesting problem. It's not a website, which is my usual bag that I get paid money for, but yeah, like it is quite well documented, to be fair, and quite friendly, and they're very keen. They give you a lot of. I think I've got like over $300 of credit. I don't know how that's happened, but it's just there, which is pretty good. But yeah, like it seems fine. But yeah, I've sunk 2 days, which maybe isn't that long, but it's been quite long and yeah, quite difficult. So, but the main thing I was thinking that I would encourage the world to go and do is build higher level developer services around using these other ones as like the building blocks. That would be great. Because yeah, I can't deal with doing them directly.
I guess because Google is actually the third, right? So maybe that's why they're giving you so much free cash, because obviously trying to compete with.
They're behind Azure, are they?
Yeah. Amazon I think's 1 and Azure's 2 and Google's 3, I think.
Amazon don't seem to give. I've looked at the alternatives. I didn't look hard at Azure, but
it's just different.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you can't really share experience between them.
Amazon seems to be the least friendly. But
yeah,
like in terms of like you just look at it and you're like, what the heck is it? Like they use a lot of their own. They invent terminology and use it a lot. So they start using all these nouns that you're just like, I don't know what you're talking about anymore. And then there are nouns that are referring to other nouns you don't know. And then before you know it, you're like,
well, they have an acronym problem, and they have I think actually quite good once you know what you're doing, but they expose a lot of detailed options inside on the web UI. So I think like I know Azure, they don't do that, and then if the point we have to do anything more complicated, they're like you have to use our command line API. Whereas I think Amazon, there's still a line of things that you can't do on the website, but you can do that. You get a lot further down the list of things that you need to be able to do, and you can probably do most of them on the web before it's like now you have to use the web API, the command line or web API to do stuff.
Google's console is pretty well done, I would say. I'd say it's well done. I would go as far as that. And the docs are pretty well done, and the naming of things is in general good.
Better than Amazon. I know Amazon have a particular problem with naming.
I've used quite a lot of cloud stuff recently, because I also wrote a thing which takes like an audio file of me speaking and produces a subtitles file so that I could subtitle, like kind of YouTube style subtitle. And I found out why Alexa and Google Home and all these things don't work super well, because when I put my voice into them, there's certain words which it consistently gets wrong. Many around my funny accent.
It's all helping though.
Yeah, certain words.
Going back into the AI.
Oh, that's true. Maybe soon they'll know when I say "our." See, you're probably listening to me say "our" and you're wondering what word I'm actually saying.
Yeah, which one are you saying?
I'm O-U-R.
Oh, right. I thought the other one, actually.
You thought "our." And it
H-O-U-R.
thinks A.
Well, that is wrong.
Ah. You can see why, though. It sounds like I'm saying "ah." Oh, and I just said the same thing.
Yeah, so that's but I think as a human you can definitely differentiate the difference.
It does. I mean, in general, these things are supposed to be good with context, but in my experience, it's pretty naff with context. It was interesting. I reckon it got 20% of what I said wrong. Some of it was very technical, so I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. I was saying the word div a lot from HTML. And
it's thinking like the school slang word.
No, it wouldn't. Occasionally it got it as div, which I was surprised, because I don't think that's a real word.
No.
But
what did it actually come out with?
Sometimes div,
and then other times.
Just like sometimes 2 words.
Does it ever just be like? I can't translate that?
No, which is probably its mistake,
because it should just be like XXX.
Yeah, I just don't know.
Yeah,
unknown in like
bold.
In bold or like angle brackets, so you know. Yeah, because it doesn't. But what is really cool is the API that you call. It gives you all the words it thinks it is, and the time in the file that it happened. And it's the time in the file that was actually really useful. So I got all my subtitles built. So I wrote a script which does subtitles and like produces a subtitles format, and all the times were spot on. So it's a good starting point to then go and edit it all by hand, which was a soul-destroying task that I had to do. But yeah, higher level things, and just with developer usability in mind, from sort of the Stripe school of thinking, or maybe the Zeit now school of thinking, is good. But yeah, did you have any thoughts about?
No, I think on the cloud stuff, I don't think there was anything else. Obviously, it came across, I think, when I listened to it again, that I have a very Amazon-focused slant, but that's only because I've used a lot of their services and know my way around enough to be dangerous, and haven't used Google's one, so I don't really know the difference. But yeah, it's interesting. I like them, and I want to use them more where it makes sense. I do use Amazon's Route 53 for my personal domains, but other than that, it comes down to cost, right? Like the problem with Amazon, I think I said it in the episode, costs are a bit too opaque just to set something up and just leave it, because you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like I looked at my NAS that I have here. I actually looked at having that in the cloud, in Amazon's cloud, and then just having a permanent VPN from here to there.
Yeah.
Because my internet's fast enough. It probably wouldn't make a difference. Yeah. But it came out when I looked at it to like a couple of years ago, like it'd be $200 a month or something.
Wow.
To have the equivalent of however many terabytes of storage I've got, 10 terabytes or whatever.
That's madness.
And that's the problem. And then you're paying that forever, which is what I said in the episode as well.
Mainly that begs for me the question, what the hell are you storing?
Well, yeah. Stuff.
It's some sort of nuclear schematics or something. It's probably not even that big, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, but the thing is, like, if you want... Like, I have 10 terabytes of which I'm using, say, 4, but on Amazon, you have to provision the 10 at the start, and then you're paying for the 10 the whole time, right? So even if you're not using it, that's the difficulty.
I think it's just the configuring these things. Like, it can do everything you'd ever want, but it's very manual to configure them. So for quite common use cases, it becomes a complete faff, and you're writing loads of code and finding all the edge cases and sort of managing things manually, and it's just kind of like, ugh.
What they really need is, I think we were talking about before, in terms of the complexity and the developer focusing, they have some of those on Amazon. They need to group the services better. They need to be like, this is low-level stuff, this is abstracted, higher-level stuff and higher-level stuff again, because they just when you're logged into the AWS console, you're like, let me go into another thing. They have some grouping, but it's very vague, and the thing's so big, you're like, yeah,
it's massive,
and the naming is so bad. If you don't know what you want, like if you don't know that you want to use S3 because it's a bucket storage system, then you're never gonna find that.
S3, what a name!
Simple storage service
3.
Well, SSS.
Oh, I see.
It's like S cubed, really, but they called it S3.
S to the 3.
Yeah.
But you can't use a hat.
Well, they didn't want to support the little superscript 3.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
yeah.
No, that was it from me. The one thing I did notice actually, and I'm going to make more of an effort today, is that there was a couple of things I said where I couldn't actually hear what I said. There was like 2 words in the entire episode where I was like, what was that word? What did I say?
Oh, I didn't have that.
I don't know what it was, but I definitely had that problem.
Oh.
So I was like, well, I need to speak clearer, clearly.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, there's only a couple. It was 2 words in the whole thing, but I was like, that's annoying, because if we're recording this, people are listening to it, they're going to be like, what the hell has he said?
The other thing that the episode made me think about was, we talked about it a little bit, but the fact that software talking to one another, which is one of the big benefits of the cloud, maybe not so much with like the infra low level stuff, but with like Stripe and other things, and like for a good one, Slack. Every tool now, you'll be like using a logging tool, and it's like, do you want your exceptions to go into Slack? And you can just like click a couple of buttons and it just happens.
And they have a simple webhook API as well.
Yeah,
that you can just post to it.
Really easy. Yeah. But yeah, I think because everything's centralized and on private servers, it works. But actually, maybe in the future there'll be a way to decentralize it, which solves a lot of the problems where somehow you can run all this software. But we don't really feel like we're close to that, because you don't really want to run your own software because it's a pain in the butt. Maybe someone will make something which will make it easier to run other people's software and also not steal it. I don't know. Too many hard problems to be solved.
Yeah.
It feels like, or maybe like everything will be like open source, but that feels unlikely too because we don't have a monetization model that really works.
Particularly with open source software.
Yeah, which I think is a whole topic for another video, but it's something I've been... another video? We do it when we do it. There's no video.
We can record it on video.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would want to see that. I think it does feel like software needs more monetization models than it has now.
Yeah.
And open source is...
Isn't a monetization, it's just here's something for free, right?
Some people have monetized it by providing other services around it, like...
Yeah, like the Java model, I guess. This is a traditional one where you have a free version and you can pay for support on top. Or the Red Hat model.
Red Hat and MySQL, I think, have done quite well out of it. And maybe Docker are trying to do quite well out of it. But you need something really big. And it's not a great monetization model because open source software, like everybody's using it all the time to build stuff, but not paying for it. It's really strange.
If you think of MySQL, right? Like how many people who are using MySQL are actually like, you know what, it's serious enough for us that we need to pay for the support. Must be like 1%.
Yeah. So yeah, that just feels like another problem that's kind of tying into why everything... a lot of the problems we reference with, you can't use it in this company and that company, are because of those business model constraints that Slack are not going to give you a Slack to run locally because then you're just like, I took your source code or whatever, like, you know. Yeah,
there is that risk, right? If you're putting something internally that once you give them that, they can do something malicious or not rely on you anymore because they can just build an equivalent.
Yeah, it's weird. Although
Atlassian basically revolve around that and they've done okay. So they were on-prem first before they were cloud-based, right?
Oh, yeah.
They had Jira years ago, before they had their
Of course, it was like a big deal when it went in the cloud.
And it's Java as well, so you could probably decompile all of their classes if you want.
Probably why it's so good. Cool. Yeah, but I didn't really have anything else, really.
I have had a little bit of feedback from a friend of ours. Not particularly insightful, but I thought it was interesting anyway. The first thing was that he was like, do we want to use a line to finish the podcast, like your Exit 0 one that you used? And I was unsure, but I said I'd mention it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think Exit 0 or Exit 1 to a higher number, depending on how the episode's gone. I was thinking about it on the way here, actually.
I think you can only go up to 128 in Linux, if we're being technical.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, I think there's a maximum. I don't know what it is.
I'd have looked like a right idiot if I'd have said Exit 256.
Well, it might be 256. I can't remember, but...
yeah, maybe something like that. Maybe something...
I wasn't sure.
I think it would be quite a good way to sign it off.
Well, last week's we ended with Let's Eat, so, because we were just quite hungry and our food had turned up.
Abruptly finishing. I quite like abruptly finishing, but yeah. We'll have to think of funny things to say.
And also the other thing that the same person texted me about, WhatsApp me about, was once we'd agreed the name of the podcast, the first question in that episode that I asked you was, were you happy with the name of the podcast? Which he thought was quite funny. And I realised that it wasn't a particularly excellent question, as we had given that name.
Yes.
I was like, I wasn't sure where I was going to go with that. I'm not going to be the next Michael Parkinson.
I'm still... No, not yet. Give it time. I did have one piece of feedback as well from one of our loyal listeners, which was just that his grandmother's name is Marjorie.
Oh, yeah, you told me about that.
Which I thought was...
I wondered if you'd subconsciously named it that because you knew somebody...
No, I know why. My Mrs. Richard has a business / something acquaintance who's a slightly elder lady, and she's called Marjorie. And I think that's what put it in my mind, because I was like, I'm emailing a woman called Marjorie.
Because for me, it was completely out of left field, which is why I liked it.
Realise as well, I totally can't spell Marjorie.
I have no idea how to spell it.
No,
you've seen it twice or 3 times. I'm like, maybe this is right.
Yeah.
Google hasn't corrected me, so I'm assuming it's A spelling.
There's like a spice called like marjoram. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, there is one.
Similar. And I'm always like, don't write that one. That's a spice. You'll look like an idiot.
Yeah. That was it from follow-up for me. More just had a couple of people listen and a little bit of feedback, so I thought we can at least mention it so they feel appreciated and loved.
Yep. All the Phillips.
His entire family.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to talk about today what we want to talk about today is, I've put it as office and bro in quotes culture. Is that what you thought it was?
Brogrammers, yeah.
Brogrammers.
And just
Culture in offices and Silicon Valley, I guess, as well.
To do with like programmer people.
Yeah. So this was my suggestion.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's something that you read about a lot in the news. And, well, to start for me, is that this bro culture idea feels like it's more of an American Silicon Valley thing than it does here in the UK, is my initial thought. But similarly, everywhere I've worked has had a very poor female contingent of developers or related IT people. So then maybe that is a bro culture. I wasn't sure.
As you know, I extensively research every episode before we come on air. And on the train on the way here, I was thinking about programmer culture, and I was thinking about, like the lack of women in software engineering. And then I started Googling all these stats because I didn't want to become... So
you have some stats?
No, well, I just Googled them, and now they've entered my mind and probably exited again. But yeah, I was thinking, I was wanting to see like how many women do related university degrees. Yeah. One thing I will say about this episode is I'm very glad we get to edit it, but I feel the biggest risk is that in editing we mess it up and then we'll say something horrendous that will be on the
really
internet
offensive.
for really offensive. So generally we're not too offensive about these sorts of things, but you never know. But
I think it's important, and one of the things I want to talk about later is why bro cultures work, because in Silicon Valley they've been very effective in some companies.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you have some stats for us. Go for the stats.
I don't actually have any stats,
sorry.
But I think, they're just... I was looking at... because I think... I don't know what I'm not a HR person or a HR expert, which is like the people in like human resources, the people that deal with these sorts of issues in the bigger companies. But one of the ways of thinking about it is if you have certain criteria for your intake of people that you're hiring, I don't know if it's reasonable to expect to beat the ratio of men to women in the intake in who you end up hiring. That seems like a bit of a lofty goal. So if only 25, say hypothetically, only 25% of computer science graduates are women, and you're like, our target's 50, and we hire computer science graduates, that seems potentially unlikely unless you're like prioritizing hiring one sex over the other. So I think, in my mind, if you work backwards, you should try and get more people to do the like correct education, and then hope that you stay in parity with the ratios that are coming out. I think that sort of makes sense. I'm not sure what like the official like party line on that is.
Yeah. Well, if you're doing it more, if you're aiming for a percentage higher than that percentage, that would be positive discrimination, would it?
Basically. I don't see it. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's just a thing that happens. Like I would guess that potentially say 25% of women graduate from computer science, and then only 10% of them make it into a career in like computery stuff. Then that maybe doesn't mean you've positively discriminated for men. There's just been some drop off and they've gone elsewhere.
No, I mean positive discrimination the other way.
Yes, but if you wanted to...
But if there might be the reason those 15% aren't then going into a developer job is because they don't feel they want to work in that industry, right? So then there is still work to be done there.
It's but the whole programmer thing. Have you watched the TV show Silicon Valley?
No, I haven't.
Because they've got a couple of characters in that show. I'd highly recommend... Bill Gates recommended it, and, obviously he's second to me with his recommendation. But like, I think actually it's a very well done HBO show about sort of startup culture in Silicon Valley, and there's these two programmers that work for the company that's sort of like Google, but it's called Hooli in the show, and they're just like, yo bro, what's up? But they're like also coding, and they're always like going to the gym, and they've got like shakes and stuff, and they're just like the perfect kind of programmer kind of thing.
So on the female side, there was one thing I read a while ago. It's highly unlikely I'll be able to find the link for the show notes, but I will try. Where there was a hiring manager that was like, look, I want to hire more women. Mm-hmm. And the recruiters were just like, we just don't have them. And then he was like, okay. But then he was like, they got to the point where this hiring manager was like, you can only send me female potentials. Mm-hmm. Don't send me any guys. And it was only at the point where he did that, did they actually then were like, oh yeah, we've got these 20 20 people.
That's interesting.
Because I think they felt that they would just not be hired. I think this was, again, more of an American...
Yeah.
It's an American article, and I will try and find it out to give it to sort of firm that up a bit. But I think there's part of it is some discrimination at maybe potentially all levels of the hiring process. But then, you've also got, like what you used to do is training people up that haven't been through a university education to be a developer, right? So there aren't that many there are avenues of that way as well to get that stuff done, and I wonder whether that, if they don't feel like, obviously need to tackle why women don't do as many of the STEM, that's what they call it, right? Science, technology, engineering, and maths degrees.
That's the one.
That's obviously an issue, but then also there are other avenues that maybe should be pushed more aggressively towards women to be like, look, are you looking for a change in career? Become a software developer, and then you've just got a bigger set of people, hopefully.
It's one way of circumventing the problem of like there aren't enough people doing it at university or getting an education in that thing. It's just to take, if you're teaching people to code from scratch through like boot camps or other things, then you can. There's no reason that women may want to or not want to do that. But yeah, you might get less women apply still, possibly.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I have again forgotten all the stats, but there are differences in America in STEM subjects between different ethnic minorities. So I think Asian women are much better represented than sort of other everyone else women, which is interesting. Which kind of makes you think that it is a cultural some sort. It's not like it's some sort of nurture issue where something has gone different for them, and I'm guessing probably their families or the way that it's perceived for them is different, so they're more likely to go into it. So I'm imagining that's why that is. But it kind of shows you that perhaps that you could get it fixed if things were changed.
So I guess when we talk about the bro culture, I think we talk generally, I mentioned from a women point of view initially, but it's actually just generally minorities, right? So if we think about bro culture, it's white males is generally the stereotype, right? So even like you were saying there about different ethnic minorities are also underrepresented in some of these cultures, office cultures, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And particularly with our software engineering, whatever the word is, profession, it's probably the right word, then that is a particular problem. And
there's definitely not going to be an even distribution between different ethnicities and programming jobs, I would imagine.
So one of the things I was thinking is that you read a lot in the news about, particularly in Silicon Valley, these cultures. And I was thinking, it is terrible, but there are some advantages, I think. Yeah, particularly when you're very small.
There are. Because
everyone is sort of... it's not to say that it's the right thing to do, but in terms of advantages, I would say there are things where, you're all from similar backgrounds.
Yeah.
So you're all going to think in similar ways.
Yeah. And
therefore, if you're getting a group of sort of 3 or 4 people together to do something, if you're all, vaguely, pointing in the same way, it's going to make that... It could potentially make that job more efficient or easier.
Yeah, you might gel better. I guess
gel quicker, I would say.
Gel quicker, yeah. It's kind of like American football teams or rugby teams or something. They kind of have, because that's just like all guys in one place. They kind of have something similar to that. American football from afar, not as an avid watcher, seems like something which has that quite heavily, where they're kind of all just like
egging each other up and
and it's quite
a lot of chest bumping.
But I don't know. One thing that's occurred to me when I was reading about brogrammers is whether we're programmers.
Okay.
I don't know if you thought about that.
No, not at all.
Because I reckon I can think about it. I can say some things now that will make you think about that. So if you think back to when we were at university, I was thinking about different programs. It's such an interesting topic because different programmers have a stereotype of being kind of introverted and quiet and not having good social skills. Yeah. And a programmer, I think the official Urban Dictionary definition is kind of like someone who's basically like a frat boy. So they kind of have to be quite social.
Right.
And I think when we were at university, there were quite a lot of people who were kind of much quieter than us. And maybe to them we were programmers. I don't know.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. But then there's also the stuff about like very high like sort of masculinity stuff. And unfortunately we have both been going to the gym, but
we're not quite there.
We're not we can sort of aspire to get there, but I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. But yeah, it did make me think, like, am I a programmer? I think it depends. I think it's in the eye of the beholder a little bit.
Yeah.
Depends who's watching.
I guess it's a scale almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like the worst ones you hear are obviously right at the end of that scale. Like, you know, the guys at Uber.
I've not encountered anybody at that end of the scale, actually, in my professional life.
Not in the... Well, have you worked with people in the US? I guess you have.
No, not bigger teams, no. Like individuals here and there.
Yeah.
But no.
Yeah, so I would agree with you, and that's what I said initially. I feel like that stereotype of this sort of bro culture isn't... I don't feel it as much here. I haven't never experienced it in the way that I've read about. And obviously the media could be sensationalising a little bit. Like, I think Uber was a well-known... was written about a lot with that. What was the guy called? Kalalnik?
Yeah, Travis.
I mean, that initial group of people, and
yeah, they seem like they're quite a bad culture.
Yeah,
so they're pretty much the poster boy for bad culture. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and so it's like, well, clearly that's not good, but it did get them along that line of getting a product out the door and it being quite, and not necessarily being successful, but having an interesting product come out of that initial period of work.
Do you think financial traders are kind of, where are they at on that scale? Because to me, they're quite far along, actually.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, one place that, when I say I haven't experienced it, you're right, in the team I've worked in.
Yeah.
But in investment banking, the trader teams definitely have some of that bro culture.
Was it Mrs. Jass's story about the apple pie? Was that?
Well,
the story I heard, I can't remember who I heard it from. Maybe as I tell you, but some traders at one of the big investment banks here, they used to go out on a night out, and then the next morning, and sort of sink a whole bunch of beers, and then the next morning, the last one there, if they were late, they had to buy everybody else an apple pie. Okay. Or someone had to eat as many apple pies as they could until they were unwell, basically, and weird.
That's not. I don't recall that.
Kind of hazing rituals, but there is because
hazing. Yeah, it's a hazing couple of rituals, right? So the couple of stories I had on that, I thought you were going to tell the one I was thinking about, but it would be the same thing. They'd go out, but because they were traders, they had to be in early the next day.
Yeah.
So again, whoever was in last would have to buy the coffee.
Yeah.
And then they would all ceremoniously just throw the coffees in the bin.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that one.
Because it wasn't about buying the coffee, it was just about making the person who's in last pay financially.
Yeah.
Which I thought, I couldn't believe it when I was told that story. It was my old boss told me that story, which is crazy.
There's something about me that likes part of that story. Part of me thinks that's a terrible waste and like, what the hell? But part of me thinks it's the ultimate insult to force someone to go out and buy something for you and then just not even consume it. Just throw it away. It's so ridiculous.
But they do tend to be very heavily male dominated.
Yeah.
And they do tend to have that sort of work hard, play hard attitude, which I think puts them quite far along that scale, actually.
Yeah, definitely. My Mrs. Rich is a trader, and I could definitely attest to like it is quite. She's obviously a massive bro. I don't think she would mind me saying that, to be honest, but yeah, it is a different kind of. I mean, yeah, I think it's difficult to separate bro from just like male, but I don't think
there is a definite separation though.
Bro culture, I think it's less likely to exist in a 50-50 men to women split. I don't think you'll get a critical mass of men behaving like idiots if there's too many women who are their peers around.
Well, I think that's the point, right? I think is the reason these cultures exist is because it's historically a male-dominated industry and still a male-dominated industry. So then you get, it's like, and that's why the equivalent is to like frat houses, right? You've got in America, we don't really have that here in the UK, but in America you have these frat houses where lots of guys live in one place and basically just do crazy shit
with red cups.
Yeah,
which I don't understand.
Those have moved out. I mean, they're in common.
They're in common circulation. I still, every time I drink out of a red cup, I feel so cool. Which probably is the reason that I'm not a bro.
but I guess that's maybe why it exists more there, because they have that sort of concept even at university level, where you're splitting people by their sex, and potentially, I don't know, in terms of diversity, ethnic diversity in those frat houses as well. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was again mainly male white people in those frat houses.
The only bro, I mean, when did bro come into like? I feel like when we
it's
started,
relatively new.
Yeah, quite new.
I think it's been since like a lot of these new startups have come along.
Yeah,
like Uber and those ones. There definitely wasn't a term when we were at university.
I don't know if it's just it wasn't a term then. I would say that it's been popularised in sort of the last 6 or 7 years. But the closest thing to bro when we were at university was definitely sports teams.
Yes, and you would definitely call those guys
bros now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't lived until you've drunk a dirty pint out of a glass which has a live rodent in it. That's the kind of like random...
out of a shoe or something.
Hazing.
Yeah.
I find that stuff so strange.
And interesting now, I don't know outside of the UK, but in the UK there's a lot more negativity about, and some universities banning those rituals, right? Initiation ceremonies.
Like hazing, yeah. That's such a strange thing. I don't get it.
And I think it's good that those things are changing now, because it means that they're more welcoming for anyone, right? Rather than somebody who's willing to, run around the town naked or something. Or
it's strange. It's really weird. But yeah.
And maybe all of that is slowly changing the environment to allow more minorities and women to come through.
Yeah.
All different professions, not just ours.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess bro is going to come from the place that people have come from before, which for most Silicon Valley people is going to be university. So if there's like a frat boy culture at university, it just gets carried over.
Yeah.
But it is strange. But I've not really worked with anybody who I really thought was like a bro. But
I would say, we probably have to cut this out, but that guy that you used to work with that was really stacked.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he might be close to it. But even he was pretty chilled out. He was never... No, he was just stacked.
He's a caricature of a bro. But he's not bro.
But like, gentle personalities... Yeah, he was always quite cool.
He is a really cool guy, yeah.
But he was like...
He could be, but he just wasn't.
Which is good.
But yeah, it's kind of...
obviously you could cut
It's a strange thing. But there definitely are... Before you get to bro, there's still quite a lot of sort of male behaviours that are not...
Yeah, I mean, the stereotypical one is going to like a strip club or something, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't know if Mrs. Rich has had to go to a strip club with her team.
No.
Okay.
I think it would be a bit weird, but I've heard stories third hand, and it still happens sometimes, which I find quite surprising in the year we're in. But yeah, I think I have seen some stuff like not. So I think in my career, everything was okay. I started off in quite big so financial services has a slightly, especially if you're not a trader, it's a pretty good culture for this stuff in general. So the first place I worked, and I think probably from the sounds of it, the first place you worked, you wouldn't think, oh, a woman can come in and work here and it would be fine. Maybe in a few teams. Maybe you worked in an all-male team at some points.
No, we had a couple of we had an intern that worked with us for quite a while. Not an intern, a graduate that worked with us for 6 months that was female. But yeah, generally, like, I was in the floor I was on had maybe 30 to 35 people. Mm-hmm. And I'm struggling now to think if there were any women in that.
At all?
Yeah, maybe one I can think of, maybe two. And that was it. I mean, it was an entirely IT floor. It was, it was all software development and related, so project managers and stuff. But so that I think that was particularly bad for such a big organisation.
How many technical women have you worked with in your career? So like women that write lines of code more than as like
their main job, right?
Yeah, as kind of like their primary thing, not as like an auxiliary. I went in and did this SQL thing. Or
So there was the graduate that we had at my first place.
Yeah.
And I'd be tempted to say that's the only person.
So
the only woman, sorry.
I can think of a couple, 2 or 3 women. What's interesting as I think about this, I mean, this isn't enough data, but most of the people I can think of are young. So they're just graduated and they're graduates. Mm-hmm. And then I think what happens is, a lot of people, to be fair, transition away from coding, but they seem, in my mind, feels like they're more likely to transition away and move on to one of the sort of things around programming which are important as well, but like things like project management, BA, like, you know, business analyst, gathering requirements, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But then, you know, anybody, men and women both do that. But it feels like perhaps they're less likely to stick on. There was a technical architect at my first job who was a woman, and a contractor, and I think she is the only technical contractor I've ever known that's a woman. I was thinking about her before this episode.
Wow.
Because that's another thing. So what I was going to say is, my first couple of jobs, it kind of felt like perhaps it was mainly men, but I didn't feel like there would be a hostile environment to women. But then I switched to contracting, which is a bit more sort of mercenary and bigger, like a big consulting firm. I'm confused about the firms I've worked for and what they do. But yeah, like a big consultant firm, which has a similar but slightly different culture. And it was very much like project-based, lots of traveling. And for whatever reason, I started to feel... Actually, in that first job, I felt like that women would be welcome there. But then I took another job after that at a small DevOps company. And I must admit there, I kind of found myself thinking, well, it's a bit spot of luck that I'm a man, because I just couldn't really see how... Just didn't really feel... It was so male-dominated, I think, partially because it's DevOps, which is... Yeah. Of all the things to do in software is like... I'm sure there are some excellent female DevOps people, but it feels like it just seems like a field that's just dominated. Like there's just men everywhere. Yeah. And I don't think they had any female engineers doing DevOps that I heard of in the entire company. So that was kind of like, and I guess those people had probably worked in DevOps for a long time. So the culture there was a bit different. And that was kind of the first time I thought.
It's interesting that you explicitly thought that. At that place, there must have been stuff going on there that you were like, this is just weird, or...
A few comments were made, yeah.
Okay.
Nothing horrendous, but things that you sort of, you know, the classic, you keep your mouth shut and you just sort of think...
I mean, for all the sins of working in a massive investment bank, from a technical point of view, which I think we've spoken about before, in terms of enjoyment of the job, they were quite good at instilling a culture where you shouldn't... Like, you would never considering saying something sexist or potentially racist there, because you'd be like, somebody's going to report me here, and and it's just not acceptable.
It's not. Yeah, it's that feeling of like it's not okay.
But that's because you're going into a big organisation where the culture's already enforced. Yeah. Where it's difficult, and I guess where some of this bro culture comes around is that when you're starting from scratch, it's just you and maybe one other person, and particularly if you're friends. Depending on what kind of, and particularly if you're bros, you're going to be like a lot of, joshing around, a lot of, boozing maybe, friendly banter, all of those things then, I guess. And then as you hire people into that, it's then building out from there, and then people wanting to fit in, so then being the same. Yeah. And then before you know it, you're a company of 10 or 20 where you feel like it would be hostile for ethnic minorities or women to join.
When I started my company and we started hiring people.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about that.
I felt like if we just stuck on default, we might have hired a woman, but just on for this particular position, we were actually not really looking for many prerequisite things, which we weren't looking for science or technology degrees. We were kind of looking for maybe degrees and just smart people. And obviously the job ad will have said programming stuff, but it didn't say you needed to know anything because we taught everyone from scratch. The number of applications we got from men to women was drastic. Like, I don't know, I'd guess 1 to 10, 1 to 7.
Wow. So I mean, we should say, and I did want to make it clear when I was going to ask you the question, is that you did end up hiring, of the four people you hired, one was a woman.
Yes.
So you're already at 25% of your hiring.
Yeah.
And did you feel that, so you guys all work remotely, right? So you weren't ever in the same office at the same time, but did you feel there was a change in the culture?
Yes.
Did you feel you did?
Yes.
Did you feel it was for the better?
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to avoid getting into a situation where it's just like little things being said and what is okay, and
in terms of like jokes and banter, even in like Slack or whatever.
one of Yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking about some funny things that happen, but like, yeah, like there's just like little things. I think it's just kind of, it's like one of those rules of life when like you don't have something keeping you in, like when you don't have a check or balance or like something stopping something from happening, then it probably will happen. And a lot of these changes are not necessarily one way, but like once the doors open, it's like becomes a flood and everything. You know, one person does something and then everybody's like, oh, that's probably fine. And then before you know it, and I think it does start. I don't think it happens with like one or two or three people, but I think even if you got mild mannered men who were not like big offenders on this front, and then you got to the point where there were just 20 of them, I still think you would start to see strange behaviour. That where if you have just 20 men, I think you'll probably start to see weird stuff happening.
Yeah.
And it's just a weird, I guess it's just like a human thing. So it's
and I think it requires, but I think you being aware of it and me, I feel like I was aware of it as well, because when I was in our startup, I really did want it. At the point where we were thinking it was going to grow, I really did want to hire some women sooner rather than later, again, to sort of nudge the culture the right way. But I think also as men, we need to be aware of, and I think you're very aware of it, you know, seeing things that you're like, that's not quite right, and we shouldn't, and being then when you're a contractor, obviously you're not in a position to say anything, but if you were in a senior management position or team leader or something, you'd be like, look, you know, we need to just tone this down a bit.
I think my funniest one, the guy, he's probably listening, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's too funny.
Well, we can cut it if it's...
We can cut it if it's too bad. Probably the best one, and I don't think he actually knows about this, but because we work remotely, we were on Zoom on like, you know, video conference, and people are in like different places, and sometimes they, you know, go places or go and stay with family and they're still working. One of the guys that worked for me took a conference call topless on a boat.
What?
And I remember being like, could you just put your top back on? Because I don't think, like, I mean, like, obviously, like, I'm not offended by it, but like, I know like we work remotely and we can wear whatever clothes we want, but like,
at least some clothes.
Just some clothes, yeah, that's the rule. It's like in shots where they're like, we're not going to serve you if you're not wearing a shirt. We're having a conference call if you're not wearing a shirt.
Yeah, that's quite funny.
But it was a nice day, but still, that's quite...
And on a boat as well.
But that feels like the kind of thing that, it's interesting. I think as well, another thing is, like, I said earlier, we're talking about men and women a lot, but I think a lot of these things apply for, like, other things. So like,
which
I guess it comes down to society though as well. It does come down to society. Like I think God, this is getting into risky territory now, but I think sexist things are obviously bad and hopefully people don't say them, but I feel like sexism is less frowned upon than racism. That's just kind of where we are in society.
I think particularly in the UK, I would agree with that statement.
I don't really know about like other cultures, but in our culture, if you say something sexist, that's obviously bad. But there is like
it's more accepting.
It's more, people
let it slide a bit easier, right?
Yeah, they will.
You maybe shouldn't have said that.
So if you said something horribly sexist, people might call you on it. If you said something that was mildly sexist, like you made a joke and said, kind of like get back in the kitchen or something, depending on where you are in the scenario, people might be like, I'll let that one slide. But racism is further along. I know that I have that very British thing where like I feel this sort of self-loathing anxiety, and when someone says something that I think they shouldn't say, I get this feeling that like bubbles up where I'm like I'm kind of like dying inside, like I know you shouldn't have said that, like my brain it's not even very rational, it's just like a feeling, and I kind of just know that like racism triggers that British response harder than sexism.
But I think people are more willing to call out racism as well now. Because I think, you know, we're not old enough, but I think in the 60s and 70s, right, racism here was a lot worse. And for some reason, for whatever reason, culturally, we've managed to get past that to some degree. I'm not saying, you know, they're obviously still UKIP supporters. And, you know, British National Party people that are pretty close to that line, and probably some of them are very racist. It's like in any society, it's not solved, but it's better. But I think the stuff with like sexism and men and women is more,
more ingrained because of, I think partially because of like our predefined like societal roles. There's I think I told you before, there's this Vox documentary series on Netflix called Explained.
Yeah.
And there's a fact on there which I will remember, which is that if you group men and women and you look at how much money they earn over their careers, and then instead of saying men and women, you say women with children, and everybody else say women without children and men, I guess that is. And other genders too. I don't know. But like people, basically, women with children in terms of the money they earn way less comparably to men. But women without children, so say you're a career lawyer and you get to like 60 and you don't have any kids, you're on average be 4% behind your male peers.
Right.
So actually, the thing that's making the difference is the children bit. And obviously 4% is not great, and that's a gap that hopefully will one day get to zero.
Yeah, it should be zero.
It should be zero. Yeah. But 4%, that for me was quite like an insightful figure, because a lot of times in the workplace, some of these bigger companies, they have very like quite full on like, you know, like there'll be like a network for everything, and they'll have all these events where, you know, they'll get like a really good speaker in, and then they're like, oh, only women can go, which is like a thing that's happened before.
Yeah.
And all the women would go to this thing, and it would just be the men left there. And I remember some of the men being like, this doesn't seem very fair.
Yeah.
They've got this great speaker in, but we can't go. And but I think
those events generally are a good thing. Like they have the LGBTQ ones, and the women ones, I guess, because they're all.
You're on top of your game getting that queue in. I'd have maybe forgotten that queue.
No, I'm on it, mate.
Well done.
I remember it well. The point is for them to meet up to help encourage, you know, that group of people to, I assume, further their career.
Yeah.
In a situation where they are underrepresented.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would also be concerned about them getting people in to speak, not specifically about those things, but just to generally speak, and then be like, well, actually, we're going to limit it down. That does seem a little bit odd.
Yeah, I've seen a lot. I've heard a couple of complaints before of like, you know, are women really that disadvantaged here in bigger companies? And that 4% figure, yeah, I've heard that before. Like, you know, like
what, thinking that the pay gap is not a problem or doesn't exist?
Yeah, well, I think that 4% figure, actually, when I heard it, I was like, oh, that actually makes more sense. Like, there is a problem, and it's quite small. But where the problem is like, because we were all in our 20s then, and not many women are going off having kids or anything. It's actually later when you get to like, you know, probably like 30 on average in the sorts of companies we're talking about. 30,
it's difficult
30s.
then with the pay gap. So the 4% in your example with comparing men of the same age to women without children of the same age.
Yeah, that was in one of the Scandi countries, I think, maybe Denmark.
Yeah, to me, it's clearly unacceptable. Should be zero.
Yeah.
But
4% is also not.
It's not. I don't know if that's a lot or not.
Probably.
But the difficulty then is if you end up having kids and society seems to imply that the women has to take the time off to look after that kid.
Yes.
For say a year.
Yeah.
Again, rightly or wrongly, they're then going to always be a year behind their male peers. So then you have to compare.
Well, it becomes impossible really to compare.
Well, because then you compare the person. Yeah, because then you don't necessarily go back to the same job.
Yeah.
You might want to work part-time.
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So then it does make it very hard.
I think what's super hard about that is if you imagine if you have a 3-year career gap and then you go back to work because you're like looking after a kid and you're more likely to be a woman. I think, I don't know the statistics, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct on that one.
Yeah.
Then it's kind of like when you come back after a prolonged period off like that, your career, especially, it's quite a damaging time. It's the time we're kind of getting to now. It's where you actually sort of start to really get
potentially
promoted.
where you move up another level, right?
Yeah. And it's like you're going to miss those years and you're going to come back and then you're going to be kind of older, and then maybe people are a little bit ageist, like, oh, why are you only at this point in your career and you're this old? Which is something that, like, I think people shouldn't be judged for, but, like, people definitely are going to think about that.
I would say, actually, in our industry, ageism is definitely a problem.
It's a big problem, and we're nearly over the hill. So
I think you've told, it's a stat, or not a stat, but something you've said a lot. I think is, you know, how many people do you know in our industry over the age of 50?
50. My mentor's over 50, and he can still code like a demon.
But again, it feels like
it's
there's
rare.
an underrepresentation there.
Oh, definitely.
But I think part of that is all. I mean, some of that. Again, I don't know what percentages will be that in a lot of organisations, as a software IT person, being promoted and getting paid better generally means moving out of that role and becoming a manager, right? Which
there's a limit
part
to
of
the
that
amount
problem.
of, we were talking about impact in the last episode, but there's a limit. Cutting code depends what code it is. Like maybe you write some like worm that like takes down the entire internet, and that'll have a lot of impact. But like in general, if you're building features for like a company, you can get like there's this 10x programmer thing and all that, but there is a limit to how much impact you can have. And managing people is much more like leveraged in that you can help 10 programmers to do much better work, and then they go and do loads of work, and your better management can actually have a massive effect.
Yeah.
Or making architectural decisions can have a massive effect and save way more time. So there is like a tendency for people to move out. But yeah, it's just, I don't know what it is. I think part of it is just the industry's technology changes so regularly that
I wonder if
relearn.
you're in more like an older technology, particularly C++, seems to be, again, limited experience. There tends to be older people in that industry versus, and I guess Java would end up the same, but maybe it's that thing like we were thinking where we'll end up. I think you made the joke last week about yours could be JavaScript, and in 20 years' time you'll be a JavaScript guy working on legacy JavaScript because that's what you learned when you were younger.
The other option is that they just made so much money by being great programmers that they're just on a beach and they're just
living the dream,
having a good time
next to Branson's Island. They've got their own
Necker Island. But yeah, I was trying to make a point, and I've massively derailed myself by talking about this 4% thing.
Oh, sorry.
Another point I was going to make actually is that the bro culture stuff with, if you don't have any women, then I said earlier on that I think you can start to creep and weird things start to happen.
Just because there's nothing to balance it or to correct.
To correct, or no feeling of like
you can offend somebody.
Yeah,
there's nobody there to offend.
Yeah, it's kind of like you'll know that people will know that it's like slightly offensive, but it takes discipline for them not to creep over that line if that's somewhere they would go. And I guess it's also a function of like society and what's normal. But then another thing that I think is true is it depends. When I say that, I think that those women in this case need to be people that are considered peers.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you have an office, and I think that's where programmer has really taken off, is because in Silicon Valley, programmers are like, in London, that's not so much the case. We've talked about this before, but in Silicon Valley, programmers are like, they make a lot of money, like frankly an outrageous amount of money compared to what a programmer can make in most other cities that aren't in the US. It's not ridiculous anymore, but it could be like twice as much. I get the feeling, and so they are sort of like the MVPs, and I think that gives them sort of like whereas here a trader I would say has more of that sort of, rightly or wrongly, whether the job's that hard or that important, whether either of them are, but it's kind of, it has that reputation and that sort of comes with it. So yeah, I think if you have like 30 men in a room and then there's like a PA to like the boss who's a woman, I don't think that's going to temper it a bit, but not the same as it.
Yeah, I think them being peers, I would agree. In my current place, we have in the entire company we have of 25 or whatever across 2 offices. The 2 women are the PA for each of the office.
Yeah.
Or the office manager for each office here and in Mumbai. So that's not great either, right? Because that's sort of reinforcing stereotypes of which jobs men should do and which jobs women should do.
Yeah.
I think, and I agree. I don't think it tempers the culture quite in the same way.
But because women seem less likely to stay technical, and they tend to, I think in your sort of average Silicon Valley company, again, this is totally not backed up by stats, I think you're more likely to find women in roles like UX, project management, those sorts of things. But if programming is elevated, then you may end up with a scenario that perhaps that's how it comes about.
Yeah, where the programmers feel like they're above everybody else, so they can say what they want, and because it's generally guys, it then turns towards this sort of bro culture. Yeah. I mean, I should say, I guess, that I am actually half Indian.
Which gives you a big advantage in this conversation.
I don't know why. just because I'm not a whitey.
Yeah.
But I've personally never experienced any racism or anything like that. But I mean, I was born in the UK. I grew up here.
I'd imagine that makes it.
And I think it's the cultural thing more than the colour of my skin at that point.
Yeah, I reckon that you're probably.
But similarly, I don't look obviously Indian or black or anything. You know, I look sort of European, is what a lot of people say, right? So again, I don't know whether, even though I have that half Indianness, whether
they all guess, but they all guess wrong.
Yeah, which we've seen a lot, right? Yeah.
Are you Mexican? No.
Egyptian.
Egyptian. Yeah. We've had all of them. I quite enjoy it. Cypriot, yeah.
So it's easy for me to say, oh, I'm half Indian, but I haven't seen it. But I wonder how much of it is just because I don't look. You know, I look sort of European, so people just don't. It doesn't cross their minds. Whereas if I looked more obviously Indian, whether that would I would have had a different experience.
Maybe, that's an interesting one. I would just guess as well that different ethnicities are not represented at all in, like, proportionally based on society.
Yeah, similar to the way you're saying about women.
Yeah.
We're 50-50 in the population, more or less, right?
Yeah.
And it's clearly not that.
Yeah, I was reading some stats about STEM subjects, and I think, well, I said before about Asian women, but I think in general, and it seems the same in Silicon Valley, Asian people, I don't know if they're well represented, but they're certainly there in a decent proportion. I don't know how it is. I don't know how it is based on society as a whole.
But in terms of that ethnicity,
yeah,
there's above normal. There's just representation.
There is some. I don't know. We need to get the stats out, but we've come heavily armed with statistics. But yeah, I would guess it's either over or slightly under, but it's not ridiculously under.
But I think part of this conversation, it's not for us to necessarily be 100% factually correct. It's that we've both worked in a number of places over a number of years, and it's our experience of these things that are becoming big news items and stuff that people want to talk about and rightly want to fix. And that was more the reason I wanted to talk about it, because I feel like I haven't worked anywhere where I feel like it's been an absolute problem to have different ethnicities or more women. But similarly, then I haven't worked anywhere where there has been even close to a 50-50%.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, why is that the case? And is it actually that we're just reinforcing it, even though I feel like we're quite, again, obviously being a bit sort of self-promoting, but I feel like, particularly yourself, what you said, and myself, I feel like I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
Maybe more aware of it than other people.
Yeah.
And hopefully we get to the point where we're in a position in a bigger organisation to actually make active decisions towards forcing the issue. But
I think the thing is that's difficult about all these issues is you've got the stuff that you can see, and then you have like what people call blind spots, so things that you think or things that you do that you don't even think about, but you have like biases that are built in that just happen. So when you're more likely to quickly assume that someone's rubbish at something because of some like bias that's in the back of your brain, but rationally you don't have it. That's what's hard. And it's like the other things that like we're saying or doing. I think one of the most interesting places to look at with this is maybe mental health, because...
Oh, that's interesting. Why do you say that?
Because I think society knows that racism is wrong and has moved to a decent-ish place where there's still room for improvement, but we're kind of, we've made big strides.
Well, particularly in the UK.
I
think in America, for example, I don't think we're quite as
far
along,
it depends. America's such a big country. I think it depends where you are. Yeah. But, and women were probably, I would say, a little bit further behind, oddly, in a way. It feels to me, it's like...
I could see that point.
Yeah, and then I think mental health is like way behind both of those by quite a long way. And
as in it's not talked about.
It's not. Yeah, I think because of the stigma attached to it.
Yeah,
we just have it's society in general, but then obviously it translates quite heavily into work. It's just not ready to like. Like if someone breaks their leg, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's fine. Dave's going to be out for 3 weeks because he broke his leg. But if Dave is suffering from depression and can't get out of bed, that's a much more difficult thing for it's just...
Yeah,
hard for him
people wouldn't want to broadcast that, right?
Yeah, and it becomes like a sensitive, and there's like a stigma associated with it.
And then, sorry, how are you mapping that to what we're saying here? You feel
I'm trying to think how I was mapping
or are you just
it.
adding it to the scale of how far along we are in terms of acceptance?
Yeah. I think that's one that you can look at where perhaps, and the reason I was going to say about that one is perhaps it's a place where I've noticed in the last couple of years that as much as I rationally know that I shouldn't have stigmas about mental health stuff, I kind of still do. And I kind of like, like if I feel like if I had something, like for me, if I was having like anxiety or depression or something, I think I would really think carefully before like going into work and being like, telling people about it. I don't
As
think
in
that
you'd struggle to go in and say that you were suffering because you feel like people would judge you.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's like a difficult thing. I think a lot of what's brought this on for me is that Mrs. Richard runs the mental health. She started, which again just shows the problem. She started a mental health network at a big American bank, but they didn't have one.
Yeah.
Right? And obviously, how long's their women's or, whatever network or LGBT network, they'll have existed for 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And this one didn't even exist, let alone like have gained any traction. I think they're starting to pop up in maybe like the last sort of 5 years. But it's just it's interesting because it makes you realise, like I always think there'll be these things that our children look at us and go, what are you thinking? Like,
I think that's a prime example, right, of we're old enough to see the before and after, right?
Yeah, we're in like kind of the middle. Oh God, don't say that. But we're kind of in.
No, but we are, right? Like,
yeah, we are.
We were old enough 15 years ago to then and to know now that it's weird that nobody ever spoke about this thing, which clearly, as gets reported in the news, a lot of people suffer.
Oh, that's what's so shocking about this one in particular, is it can affect anybody. And whenever you talk to people about it, everybody is touched by it. It's massive. But but it hasn't quite. Yeah, it's interesting, but that's where I notice blind spots in myself, because even though my wife's like, heavily involved with all this stuff, and I should be the most PC person on the face of the earth about it, I realise that when I don't say things out loud, but in my head when I'm sort of watching things and people are talking about things, and I'm thinking, would I, I notice that I have like biases and things that I would and wouldn't say if it were me in that situation.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to like, I think for me, it's like if I break my leg, I can say, well, I broke my leg and I did something silly for like 2 minutes. But ultimately, the asset that I feel I'm selling when I'm in the workplace is my brain. And to admit that there's something with my brain which is not operating the same as like, I was about to say the majority of the population, but I don't even know if that's true.
Yeah.
Because this affects so many people. It is actually normal when you look at that. It's quite a normal thing to happen. There's some crazy stats like, I don't even want to get the stats wrong. I should have come prepared with the stats, but it affects so many people in their lives. But at the same time, I realise...
And it's so nobody ever talking about it.
Yeah, it's a weird one, but it lets you see like kind of... Maybe culture in the population moving along will solve some of these problems, hopefully.
I think, just as an anecdote more than anything, but speaking about how I think it's changed, when I was younger, maybe 10, maybe younger, slightly... my mum had some sort of mental breakdown because of her job. She worked as a nurse. And it wasn't really spoken about at all. And I actually haven't, even now, really spoken to her about what happened. I just know that she stopped working for a long time and then never worked nights again. She only was, after that, she went back, she'd only work during the day. But it's just never, and again, obviously she's 30 years older than me, so again, different generation. So whether she doesn't even feel that she can because it's not really spoken about.
Mm-hmm.
But I would hope now if like you or my wife or other close friends were really struggling with something, I feel now you'd be okay to at least try and talk about it, even if the other person can't necessarily associate it. It's just again, sort of.
Yeah, what's quite hard with mental health is when it's on the fringes. I feel I feel the same as you with that when something gets really bad, but it's when things are kind of in the middle, and it's
like somebody just saying that they're struggling, or it's just there's something going on in their lives that they're finding really hard to process.
Yeah.
And it's difficult as well because I suppose, again, I don't know what it's like in other cultures, but there's still a limit to where even really good friends will talk about certain personal issues, right?
Yeah.
So then it's like, well, how would you know necessarily that you were, if you were talking about perhaps a parent being really unwell, you'd then be, the other person would be more like, well, are you doing okay? Because, they're in hospital or whatever. But a lot of the time, I wouldn't, even, with close friends, with you probably I would, but with other close friends, you might just have a conversation where that doesn't even come up. You don't feel like you could talk about it. Saying like, oh, parent or somebody's really unwell, and actually I'm finding it quite hard to cope with it.
Yeah, it's hard, but it does give you a lens to look through when you're thinking about like the other things like bro culture.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like,
I think it's good to think about it as that spectrum and where we are along it for each of those things. And I think it's absolutely right that I think we have been seeing that mental health one come from zero, working its way up.
It's close to zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've banned electric shock therapy now, which is a win. Which my grandmother had that one, my dad was telling me about. She's passed away quite a long time ago now, but like when he was telling me, I was like, that is crazy.
I think my dad has administered it as a doctor when he was a trainee.
Yeah, a long time ago. It's
not that long ago though.
It's kind of a crazy thing,
but yeah, I think it's a really good. I think it's just interesting, and that you have those different things on the spectrum, and interesting to see how they all come. In 10 years, you'd hope they've all continued to progress. Hopefully, we don't have either any regression or B, one stagnating. We don't want to end up like The Handmaid's Tale or something like that, which is, I don't know if you've seen that show.
No.
I actually couldn't watch it because it frustrated me so much. It's where it's in America, but there's an issue with fertility. Mm-hmm. So a majority of women can't have babies anymore, but there's like a subset that can. Mm-hmm. So they it basically gets taken over by like some religious extremists, and then all of these women's rights are just taken away, and they're basically enslaved to a family.
Oh, right.
And the family, she basically makes the baby for this family, and then the family keep the baby, and she's just sort of a servant or slave even. But I mean, it's interesting, but I found it so hard to watch because I was just like I just wanted to scream. I was like, how is this happening? It's terrifying.
Pretty harrowing.
So yeah, that was something perhaps on the extreme of this sort of stuff that we're talking about, but it's an interesting example of the worst case.
Do you have anything else culture-wise for programmers? Maybe that aren't the sex or race or any of those things, just other cultural things, or maybe bad behaviours or like tendencies.
I think this is. I would say this is applicable in all jobs.
Yeah.
But there's that human sort of feeling to want to integrate with a new set of people, mm-hmm. and I feel like it's really easy to cross that line to fit in, mm-hmm. whichever line we're talking about, right? Sexism or racism or anything like that. You're because you're new. Say you're starting a job and you're like, no, I want to get along with these guys.
Yeah.
Somebody makes a little bit of a joke.
Yeah.
And you're trying to fit in, so you're going to try and want to, one up it or join in with that sort of macho culture.
One of the things we have in this country, actually, which is kind of like that, is our drinking culture.
Yes.
Which is actually quite shocking, even after all of the drinking we did in university, which was quite a bit, because we just have a big drinking culture from the time we're 18, slightly younger, depending on where you are. But like you go to work and there'll be like Thursday night, and people don't just have like one or two drinks; they'll have like 6 or 7.
And there's definitely that feeling of it. Particularly again, if you're new in a company, you're going to want to be there, and you've got to keep.
In my first job, I remember running over one of the bridges in London to get away from my boss to stop drinking. Like I managed to slip him for like, this is when I was an intern, I managed to slip him for like a couple of seconds, and I was like, just run. Just flee, because
you were done.
It's weird. For those of you that have not visited the UK, this may be an advert to get a job here or something that will discourage you, but basically on Thursdays everybody drinks loads, and it's just accepted that Friday is kind of your hangover day. Yeah,
less productive,
and you're not going to get a lot of work done,
particularly in financial services.
Yeah, particularly it's a financial services thing actually, not although beers in tech only companies are a thing, and it's a weird that I find
Like
that
WeWork,
weird.
for example.
Yeah, WeWork has a beer on tap. I worked in a company for quite a big consultancy where we'd have like a show and tell or something where people show what they worked on, and they would just get a bunch of beer and wine.
Yeah.
But it's normally beer.
Only.
Usually beer is the primary thing, and sometimes it's wine, but it's often beer, which again, I would say is kind of a little bit catering for men, because in general men probably drink more beer than women. Although thankfully in the last year my wife started drinking a lot more beer, which has been excellent. But yeah, I think so that's like another weird one. But
what I was going to say generally, just on the other point, is I feel like people should just feel like they could be themselves more, and I don't know how as a team you necessarily encourage that. You know what I mean? Rather than, I guess it's more like if you're like a clique of people, like you've got, say your team's a team of 4 and the other 3 guys get on like a house on fire. You come in as number 4 and you feel like you have to dive head in, and because they're not sort of adjusting their behaviour for a new person, they're just carrying on, and you feel you have to join them.
Do you feel like you're yourself when you go to work? Is what sprung to my mind then. And how much of yourself? So
I would say I try to be myself as much as possible, because I feel like hiding that or changing it is bad, just for everybody.
Yeah.
So I
depends on who you are to start off with.
Yeah. That. And also, I would say that I'm not necessarily myself from day one. I think you build yourself up. I wouldn't say I change any of my behaviours, but I would maybe tone my behaviours down, so I won't joke around as much. I quite like joking around, not joking around in a bad way, but just like, chatting to people for a while. Yeah. Pretending that I'm not doing any work.
You kind of ease them into it.
Yeah.
To the full jazz.
Yeah, the full jazz. Just terrifying. So I definitely would feel like if I worked anywhere where I was hiring people in, I would want them to be themselves. When I was in my startup, we hired 4 people, and me and my boss are very different people, because I'm a technical person, quite geeky really. We could bore people to death on talking about geeky stuff. And my boss was completely different. He was a business guy, he'd done an MBA and stuff like that. So we were quite different. But then the people we got in were all technical. But I felt like each person was quite distinctive. I didn't feel like people were coming in to a culture that they had to feel like they had to adhere to. Now, obviously, I was already in it because I was there first. So it'd be interesting perhaps to ask them, now that we don't no longer work together. We do still meet up occasionally for food. And it would be interesting to see what they thought of it. I would hope that they didn't feel under pressure to behave in a certain way.
Seem like that to me.
Yeah, you came and visited a couple of times. So
I think now I'm older, because the way it works for me is similar to what you were sort of describing. I try and be myself because I'm good at doing that, because that's me.
That is you.
Yeah. And because also I think if you're yourself, then you're more genuine and people are going to like you and trust you more. It depends on who you are. But I think I do have a work self and a podcast self, and that, like a us hanging out self, or when I'm with my wife self, and you kind of change. And I think for me, in general, I try and keep those things quite close together. Yeah. Because I haven't got time to put on some ridiculous persona. And one of the things I see people do in corporate cultures, which is really weird, is like when they stand up in front of a bunch of people and they're clearly not being themselves, or you'll know the person, and then they'll get up and you'll be like, who you're using all these funny words and saying all these things, and it's weird. But I think when I first started work, I was a lot more malleable. Like I would check, and I think that goes back to like this whole bro culture thing, where if I'd have joined a place, like the place I joined to start off with actually was quite advanced for these sorts of things. And actually at the time, looking back on it, I thought it was kind of crazy. Like I was kind of like, I was not thought it was crazy, but I was shocked by how strongly they would they had the sense of what you could and couldn't do. And like you said before, like it was going to get called up. And I was kind of like, whoa, this is almost like, not oppressive, but it's kind of like, it was really in my face.
Quite strict.
Yeah, it was quite strict. And I was, we just come from university where every other word was an F-bomb. Yeah. And sort of now I'm in this place where, weirdly in UK culture, F-bombs at work are completely fine as well. We have a lot of strange things. In America, I think that's not...
Oh, really?
I think it depends where.
I swear a lot at work.
Oh, yeah. Everywhere I've been...
It's quite hard not to swear on the podcast.
Yes. Yes.
Which we have been trying to do.
Vaguely.
Vaguely.
I don't think Apple are gonna. It's gonna be more of the other stuff I said that wasn't backed with statistics that's gonna get us pulled from the Apple podcast. I think rather than the swear words. But yeah, no, I think. But now I think I'm a lot less malleable. Like I still feel it a bit, but then I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna be myself, like these people. And
a guy at work a guy that is non-technical at work has always said, he said to me, having watched how a smallish team has worked, he's always said that I don't suffer fools.
yeah.
And I feel like that's my personality generally. I don't feel like anywhere else I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I generally call people up if they're talking rubbish. Or if I think that what they want to do isn't a good idea.
Yes.
So I feel like that's also a personality trait that if you immediately started at a job and were immediately like that, it could come across quite badly.
You need to work yourself into it.
So you've got to, there's ways of doing that, right? So I'm not saying that I just go in and be like, right, this is all crap. We're going to just, we're getting rid of all this. I'm going to do it better because I'm better than whoever the idiot is that wrote this.
Yeah.
Maybe what I'm thinking actually was what I was thinking when I was at the current place, but you've got to start
from
a more approachable manner, right?
When you brought up this topic as a topic of conversation, at first I thought I didn't have anything to say much, and then I started thinking about it more. Then I flashed to, are we programmers? And then
which is a good point actually. That didn't even cross my mind.
And then I started thinking about bad traits in people I've worked with, and then I thought of like quite a long list, and then I was like, man, I have like half of these. And actually,
what was on your list?
Well, so I also don't suffer fools gladly, which is something that my dad is the same, and like I'm okay with people doing something wrong with like business stuff, but technical engineering stuff, I really struggle with it. Like if somebody just doesn't seem to be doing their job very well.
Yeah.
I've worked with some really great people. Like one of the jobs, I don't want to go into too much detail. I have a job where I build the front end and they build the APIs.
Yeah.
And I know how to build APIs, and I have a reasonable sense of, like I've built lots of APIs. I just happen in this job to be taking the role of I built the front ends. First guy I worked with built excellent APIs. Everybody else they've sent before, like he's busy now. He's still there, but he's busy. I'm kind of like sweating. Like they'll send me the API and I'll have to go back and be like, I really, like this isn't consistent with the API you made last week. Like, let alone like whether it makes sense. And it's like, I just can't handle that kind of, I think another trait, which perhaps I suffer from and a lot of people suffer from, and it's particularly with technology stuff, I think it applies to other things, but when you have an idea of how something should be done and you can't let it go.
Yeah, you can't accept anybody else's way.
Yeah, you just become attached. It doesn't necessarily have to be technical, but I think with technological things, you can get to the point where there's a lot of, you just really hold on to things for the sake of it.
Well, the thing is with a lot of technology problems, there's never just one way to solve it, right? There's never one that's holistically, you can just objectively be like, that's definitely the better way to do it. There are in some cases, but in most cases, it's like, well, we could do this in 3 different ways.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I picked number 2, so I want to do it that way.
Yeah. But sometimes, the thing is as well, though, is that I completely agree with what you're saying, but in the same breath, sometimes I know that other people are wrong or that their thing is suboptimal.
Yeah, because they might be thinking the objectives of their solution or the outcomes of their solution, you're seeing it differently, right? Like they could be thinking, well, this will be done in 2 weeks. But you're thinking, well, in 6 weeks' time, this is really going to cause us a problem when we want to do this other thing that we're probably going to want to do, but we haven't spoken about yet. Those sort of things, technical debt.
Requirements are king. We'll probably need a whole episode on requirements, but it's like...
But the thing is... Yeah, we should talk about it separately. The problem with requirements is that you need to work off you can never assume the requirements are right, basically.
Well, even if you get no requirements, then you sort of make them up on the fly. But it kind of comes back to what we said before about testing and whether you should write tests. It's that cost-benefit analysis of like which parameters are the most important. Is it like how long we're going to deliver this? How long is it going to take to deliver this? Or is it like how many man hours it's going to take, or like there are all these different things, how performant it's going to be, how maintainable it's going to be, what's the long-term cost of ownership of like doing it this way. But the thing is, when you first get into engineering, you don't. So I think but
how do you get around that problem of not being too tied to your solution to a problem? I guess if you're not developing it, you could be like, well, I'm less bothered. But if the problem is something that you're going to develop and there's somebody saying you can't do it the way you want to do it, I find that very hard. I would find that very hard to accept that.
I struggle immensely with these problems, and the way I've solved it is I don't work with other people very much anymore, which is not necessary. Which, when I was thinking about this episode, I was thinking, gosh, maybe that's a slight, not a good aspect of my personality or work character, but I struggle. When I ran my company, it was actually very easy because I was like the benevolent dictator, and I just dictated how everything was going to go. And obviously I made all the right decisions and all the software was brilliant, but one of the guys that worked for me started his new job, and he was like immediately describing situations where they were doing things in the way that me and him have an understanding it would never be done with the technology that we used. And they want to do it a different way. And I'm like, well, dude, you need to go and argue the toss with them and make your case. And
part of that is working in more than one place, seeing how the same thing can be done differently.
Yeah.
Because if you only work in one place, you're going to get, and particularly if you work there for a long time, you're going to get skewed to that way of thinking just everywhere.
You get, the thing is, I think as I'm getting older, it's getting worse. I think as well, there's like my view of things has changed as I've got older. The things I'm optimizing for have changed, and that would mean that I would make different recommendations on how to solve problems now than I would have done 5 years ago, because I'm like...
But you could argue you know more now.
Yeah.
You've seen more projects front to back, and you've seen the problems you get towards the end, which then is affecting the way you start projects.
Yeah, right? A lot of things about software engineering are counterintuitive, unfortunately, which is what makes it very hard. There's lots of things that, if on first principles, if you think about it, you think about something but not super deep. You're like, oh, what are we going to do? Oh, we'll throw more people at a problem to solve it.
Never works.
But like you watch that happen 2 or 3 times, and then you think, so experience does make a big difference. And you get burned. You watch other people get burned. That's probably the best way to learn, because then you don't actually have to suffer the pain yourself. But yeah, I think that's one. There's a lot of different.
So what else was on your list of?
I'm trying to think. So like people getting kind of, which I'd imagine isn't just a software thing, but I think it's particularly, there's something about it, because like if you're into software and you do it as a career, you probably care a lot about certain things. Maybe not everybody, but yeah, I end up caring almost too much. And
I would say I have that similar problem. I'm very much wanting to do things in a certain way, and it frustrates me to think that people do.
I also feel that if I work with the right people, like I know a whole bunch of people who, I think a lot of them did go to university with us. And maybe that's like a bias of like where we think the same sort of way. But I feel like if you and I or one of our other friends from university were to work on a problem with people that I like, know and respect, I wouldn't have these problems as much.
Is it a trust thing then?
Maybe it's a trust thing. But I feel like you and I feel like if we got to a point where we couldn't agree and you were like, I'm just going to do it my way, I wouldn't feel the same as I feel watching people. Maybe it's trust. I don't think it's trust though, because there's people I've met much later who I've then been like, yeah, no, this person. And the other thing that's really interesting is most problems with these people that I just gel with will give roughly the same solutions, or very broad strokes the same solutions to the same problems anyway, and agree in like 20 seconds. Whereas I've worked with things where, to me, it's like night and day, black and white. Yeah, and I cannot change their mind. I think that's one of the things that's hard about
that's true.
Going into other companies is there's a lot of inertia. If somebody's already doing something, the emphasis is on you to be like, don't do it like that, do it like this. And then they're going to be like, well, we're already doing it like that.
It's another good point, though, is that we're talking about joining a company and trying to be yourself, or we're encouraging that to a degree. But it is a particular problem, isn't it? Going into somewhere and being like, right, they're saying this is how we do these things, and you're like, well, in your head being like, well, that's horrendous. Like knowing full well that maybe, it's an early part of a project, and you've seen a year down the line when you're maintaining it and being like, well, this is really not the way to do this.
Yeah.
And having had that experience that they haven't had.
Yeah.
But actually trying to have that conversation with them as a new person coming in. I mean, I just think those sort of things are tough, and that's where you in a slightly different way, you're trying to conform and do things, be accepted in the group, and then you're saying, well, maybe I'm making technical decisions differently because I feel like that's the way these guys would want me to do it, even though I feel like it's the wrong way. And it's all about, I feel a lot of this is about sort of fitting in
Yeah,
and then
compromise.
but
I'm
you
not-
compromise perhaps compromising too much to fit in maybe, and not having an honest discussion with these people. And I feel some of that is due to if you're a member of a team and you've got somebody new starting, I feel like I've seen it so many times where they start and they just sort of get left to their own devices a little bit because they're like, oh, well, they're getting up to speed with their email. They've got to check out the code and build it. And for some reason, that's sort of just they need to do that on their own rather than you as a team, even if it's a team of two or three, being like, oh, you've started. Let's all spend a bit of time with you, get you help out, get you up to speed. So you feel integrated from the start rather than them being like sending you a wiki page and you sort of sat on the outside and they're still going, to get coffee together. Not inviting. I feel like there's a lot you can do as the team itself.
Onboarding is a thing that I think a lot of people get really wrong.
Yeah.
And
that's what I think that then plays into how that person feels.
Yeah, it makes a really big difference to
and
how
then
they feel.
maybe affects the culture as well.
Yeah. Another place what I was thinking about before this was GitHub, open source software, pull requests and issues. Is a place which normally is all right, but can descend. And I've read some stories where women that contribute to open source have anonymized themselves because they felt that their PRs just always never get
got rejected or just get ignored
or just
because they were women. That's what the implication, I guess.
But that's what they felt. I've read it on Hacker.
I feel like I've heard about that as well.
Yeah, we're never going to find that link, but we'll try for you for the show notes.
Yeah.
but yeah, I've it can descend.
Well, and as an interested related point, of course, was Linus himself recently. He's always been historically known for being a bit of a pain in the ass, and he actually realised that perhaps it had got out of hand, and he had a 4-week period where he stepped away entirely from Linux.
Really?
And
I didn't know that.
Oh, did you not? Oh, yeah. So this was just before Christmas.
Really?
So he
just realised it got out of hand.
Yeah. He officially was like, I think this is, we've got this code of conduct of how people are supposed to behave because of these things that had happened before. But then people were saying...
Of which he must have been the main offender.
Yeah, well, exactly.
So then, we should explain who he is.
Yeah, so Linus Torvalds, if you don't know who he is the guy who invented and wrote Linux, the operating system. He, on his own, in the 80s, wrote this operating system and since then has been not necessarily the primary developer, but he is the guy that decides what goes into each Linux release. He has subordinates that help him in different areas, but he's the man with the golden key.
Lieutenants, I think he calls them. I think that's the terminology.
In different areas, so like I/O
and they have like a...
And Git was obviously, if you're not aware as well, Git was his... he wrote that as well to help specifically with Linux development, which is why it has some interesting design decisions, primarily because that was the way they were developing.
So anybody can contribute code, and then it goes to up like a hierarchy, so to his lieutenants, and then he ultimately gets to decide yep or no.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the time now, apparently, he just accepts the lieutenants he tends to trust enough that he will just accept all of them. Yeah. But he is the guy that goes, right, now we're going to start the release candidate version and push it out. Mm-hmm. And just before Christmas, I will be able to find this one, I think, for the show notes. He was like, I need to step away because he realised, I don't know what happened specifically, but he was like, I've got to take some time away.
So this guy started in the 80s, as Jas said, and there used to be like a lot of university mailing lists, I think. And so he really started communicating with the internet on mailing lists because he's pretty old.
And all of the Linux dev is still on a mailing list.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, yeah.
And basically there are all these archive emails from the mailing list where he poops from a great height on other people, and it's not... I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, part of me kind of thinks that it would be funny if it was like in the show Silicon Valley. It's kind of not funny in real life. And this guy's obviously a genius, and he's contributed like way more than he's famous for that reason.
Yeah,
and
so he's of the opinion that he should be honest when he doesn't like people's code.
But he's also offensive.
But that's the problem: is that it strays from. Maybe even insulting comments about code, which I think you could be like that, okay, perhaps.
Your code is naff.
But it goes on to him insulting the person who's written it, which is obviously not okay. But that's been a standard way of him doing code reviews since, for the last 20 years.
It would be like, Yeah.
He'll be like, you know, what sort of idiot writes this? And you'll be like, well, I don't know. You know, I'm just trying to contribute.
You should. Yeah.
And he's like, you know, it's very brutal. But just to keep it on track for a second, yeah. So he took some time off because he felt that he wasn't adhering to the code of conduct, which they'd written primarily because people were complaining about the review process in the Linux development tree.
So there's a subreddit dedicated called Linus Rants.
Okay.
And he is one from 15th of August 2018 to give the listeners a flavour.
Yeah.
So he said, in fact, if the reason stated as it makes debugging easier, then I fart in your general direction and call your mother a hamster. I don't even know if that makes sense, but that's not a particularly bad one.
No, that's on his scale. It's not bad, but again, it's that line he's crossed.
The culture that he has created in that particular community. I wouldn't say it's transcended the whole software open source community, but like it's ridiculously toxic.
Yeah.
And as much as I admire, it's the same in the way of Elon Musk. Like,
yeah,
you admire somebody's achievements and like the things they're doing professionally, but sometimes they conduct themselves. I mean, you can't really compare. I think Linus, his conduct has been consistently worse.
Yeah,
like if he had a normal job, he'd have been fired a very long time ago.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy because he just personally attacks people.
But I'm hoping that, you know, he's these sort of things that he's trying to get better finally and try and be less insulting, and hopefully, and again, that's because this sort of stuff is coming to the fore now and people are realising that it's unacceptable. You know, stories of women developers changes being ignored or rejected for, it seems, no real reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is unacceptable.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up. What a topic. We could have a whole episode just on him. His incredible life, but he just... Yeah. I can't read out some of the things he said, but he said,
he said some bad things.
Absolute shockers. And like, we all feel that way when someone does some crappy code. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, but there's a difference between thinking it and saying it, right?
Yeah. And he just doesn't have that bit plugged in because it's all dedicated to just making Linux awesome or something. I don't know. But.
I think, yeah, and like you say, you can't underestimate the contributions he has had to society.
Yeah, massive. Yeah, like how many operating systems are Linux in the world? It must be like 2/3 or something ridiculous.
Well, how much stuff runs on an OS which is written by random people that you don't know?
Yeah, open source is quite amazing.
But yeah.
Any other bad practices or good ones? Bad ones are so much more fun though.
Yeah. In terms of
just like culture, office culture, and like team culture.
I think something that, although we are a particularly we're more or less, you know, male-dominated office in my current place, I feel like something that we didn't do enough was socialising. Mm. Now, I explicitly want to say socialising rather than drinking. Unfortunately, socialising... Yeah, they generally, particularly in this industry. But I feel like even amongst... We had a lot of people started in quite a short period of time, but nobody really knew each other. Mm-hmm. And so I definitely felt like it took a long time for us all to even get to know each other and sort of gel as a team.
Yeah.
Although everybody worked well professionally. And I feel like that was because we never tried to organise anything socially. And the group of people that we have in the tech team where I am aren't particularly they aren't on the sort of bro side of the developer. They're not all like going out on the lash. It's more they're all quite quiet, so it's more that we would have to force people to sort of hang out together. And I feel like we should have done more of that, mainly just so then people got to know each other better. And it didn't even have to involve drinking at all. It could have just been like, you know, bowling, or we did Bounce, which is like a table tennis place for our Christmas party, which was actually really good fun.
Yeah,
but that was like the only thing we did last year.
Yeah. So
yeah, that'd be one thing that I think you should be thinking of. Social activities that perhaps don't require drinking. That would be quite a useful one.
Yeah, and I don't know how common it is in other countries, but like the drinking culture here, I think that's another thing that in 30 years, like it's quite normal to our generation aren't going to fix it, but I feel like maybe the next one will be like, hang on a minute, we're drinking at work during a meeting, or like it's just complete things with alcohol. Like I feel like if they legalized marijuana, it would not be acceptable to be like, come in on a Friday and be like, oh, I was stoned off my face yesterday, and today I can't really do much work. Like, that would be weird. But if you came in and you were like, just drunk like 8 pints, and I got a terrible sleep, and it just
somehow that's okay.
Missed the last train home and ended up at the end of the line or whatever. Common stories you have. That's fine because it's just a cultural thing, and it's strange. I did think of another one, which you've reminded me of with Linux, which is in the first place I worked. We had people kind of like that, which were quants or strats, as they call them there, and they would just be really mean to people in a corporate environment over email. They wouldn't swear, but they would be...
Or insult your mother.
Or insult your mother, or tell her that she's...
Hamster?
A hamster or something, and fart in your general direction. But they were just kind of... They were obstructive, and it was very much a them and us.
Yeah.
Between two sets of programmers, because they viewed themselves
as
higher up in the hierarchy, because they were... So like quants or strats in financial terms, it's like they do stuff that's more financial, but with code.
They're doing like trading models or statistical analysis directly for the traders who are making buy and sell decisions for the bank.
Or their own stuff will just trade. I don't know, but it's and they were, and then I spent some time in a team of quants in my second job, and like they were all perfectly nice, but I think there's a culture there which is weird because it's not just a tech thing; it's actually a finance thing again, but to do with tech. And it's very much them or us, and I think even. Definitely a thing where they were just mean to, and they were okay to other strats or quants. And
I think that's a big problem with the bigger organisations, though. There's a lot of us and then them, whoever they are. I think I don't know if we did talk about it on the podcast or not, but we've talked about it before. Having a support team who look after you, or the deployment team.
Yeah, I think we did talk about that in testing.
Yeah. Where for us, when I was at my first place, it was definitely us and them. We weren't one team developing and deploying our application. It was us, the developers, them, the idiots that can't deploy it.
Yeah.
Whereas it's clearly like, well, we're all working for the same team.
You all got the same goal.
Yeah. But there's that absolute, like, us and them.
That kills me in big companies. I hear stories of other friends of mine that have stayed in bigger companies, and they'll be like, today my contract was renewed in my job. And I said, oh, are you going to send the contract out? And he went, oh, I've chased HR who have chased legal or something.
Oh,
and I was like, can there not just be a person that sorts this out? But yeah, I know that's actually probably more common is people-to-people conflict, especially within a team, is not as common as team-to-team.
Yeah.
Team-to-team can be, like, oh... And you get into this weird mode where people they become part of like a little tribe or unit, which is their team within an organisation, and they stop behaving in a way that's optimal for the large organisation and is only optimal for their team.
Yes.
So they'll be like, we really need you to do this thing, but we need Dave for like 3 hours to like really help us, and it will be massive. And the amount of resistance...
Yeah, because they'll be like, no.
No, Dave is a resource that's been allocated to this project. And it's like, but this other thing's clearly more important. And it's like, well, no, because, there's that kind of like inter-team... I mean, it's not... I don't know if... It is a cultural thing, I suppose, because some companies... So
when it's smaller, it's easier. But for some reason, there's that perhaps blame culture, where you as the leader, the manager of your team is like, oh well, those guys have screwed us over. It wasn't our fault; it was their fault. Mm-hmm. You're trying to offload that blame to somebody else, and then you end up thinking, well, those guys screwed us over. But actually, what the manager should have said is that our deployment doesn't work properly, but we're just blaming the deployment team.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's taking ownership for when there's issues. When you're in a small team and it's like me and you, and the deployment doesn't work, I don't go, oh, and you'd done it for whatever reason because I was away. I don't go, oh, Rich, you've screwed it up.
Yeah.
It would be like, oh, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Let's fix it.
Because you wouldn't be like that with your colleague that you work with.
Yeah, you wouldn't be like, oh, you just did it wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. And it's in some of these bigger, like when I read a lot about Tesla, who some way seem haphazard, but they seem to be trying to create a culture of just like, if you need something, just go there and do it yourself or get the other person or like it's kind of just they seem to want to empower everybody to just be able to do everything. So if you need to do something to get your primary task done, you can just go and figure it out.
But I guess there's still a level difference though, right? Because the people who are on the factory line, I think, are the complete opposite, aren't they, from what I've heard?
Yeah, that is a weird separation that they have. But I think in general, it's like that's the right way. Like they started a factory in like a, they've not taken it to like, China or somewhere. They've left it in the US. And
but then I feel like that's a similar thing that you do with like potentially like a developer team versus a support team, right? So a support team generally isn't allowed to think off plan. They're supposed to follow the guide or escalate appropriately. They're not allowed to necessarily do that, and you end up with a similar problem where those guys are basically just following a script and then immediately escalating it to the people who are allowed to think for themselves.
Yeah, that cross-team culture is that's hard. I think you kind of it's less personal, isn't it? You can hide behind like your boss or something, and it is just kind of.
And you can hide as a team unit, right? It's not, somebody says we've screwed up. It's unlikely to be specifically aimed at somebody because that would be perhaps considered unprofessional. But it would be easy to be like, oh, well, it's the KDB development team have screwed this up, or is the reason this is late. And then it's like, well, you as whoever's working on it hiding behind the team, right? And the team then is the manager or whoever's representing it are going to defend you because that's what he's sort of got to do.
Yeah.
But then perhaps that's wrong to some degree. They should actually be like, well, yeah, we have screwed up here and we're trying to fix it, rather than being like, no, the actual reason is because the business didn't sign off on X, Y, and Z. It's always like passing the buck.
How do you handle mistakes at work? If you screw up, what's your playbook? What do you do?
I guess it depends on depends what you mean by screwing up, I suppose. Like, for me, that would be the end result of that would be that we're not capturing some data that the business needs.
Yeah, so you deploy to production, and I guess data loss is always more, or maybe an outage is bad, but data loss is like probably even worse.
Yeah, people are generally not happy about the lack of data.
Because an outage is like move on and it doesn't happen again, and some people were annoyed for a period, but data loss is like that can't be undone, and you've kind of like lost some of the integrity of the data you're trying to capture. That's bad. But let's say you like lost a bit of, like, you released something to production and it broke, like it happens, it broke something and something bad happened, like either an outage or like, and then you fixed it. Or let's say you fixed it, like you're obviously going to scramble to fix it.
You'll probably fix it first, I would imagine.
How do you handle it after that? What do you do?
The couple of times that I've done it, that it's happened that have been reasonably serious at the current place, I've just been honest with the people and just said, look, there's only me working on it, so if it doesn't work,
there's no one else
to blame. Unless, I mean, even if it was, the applications that provide the data to my system aren't written by me. So in theory, I could pass the buck if I wanted to. But generally, I'm just honest with them and I say, look, this is the problem. Now, whether the person you're telling is a reasonable human being or not is a different question as to whether they'll... but generally, I'll be like, look, this is what's happened. I fixed it.
Yeah.
It's always important to say.
Yeah.
This is what's missing. And trying to be as accurate as possible as to what's missing. And then for us, then it would always be a case of, is there any way to recover what's missing?
Yeah.
So internal, like if we were missing trades that we'd done, I know that there's a way to recover that from a different source because we also put them into SQL for legacy reasons. Yeah. So I would be like, these are the ones that are missing. We actually have a procedure in place to recover this missing data. But you could say this other data set, it's missing and there is no recovery.
So yeah, I think definitely getting your ducks in a row and like having a concise story of what happened, the fact that hopefully you've already fixed it, and if there is anything else to be done or things to stop it from happening again.
Yeah.
Like people, and then being honest. But when I was talking to my other half, she was saying, maybe it's a cultural thing because she's a trader, she was sort of saying, oh, never apologise. And then we were talking, I was like, what do you mean? Because I'm the same as you. I think being honest, people will always surprise you.
I mean, it's interesting about apologising. I don't think I would say sorry that there'd been a loss of data. I'd just be like, there has been.
Yeah.
I don't think I wouldn't apologise personally.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I would just say,
Yeah.
we could dig out an old email, but I would be like, this is what's happened.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily.
And we're trying to, resolve it or something.
I think there's a difference between not apologising and admitting blame, or like, do you know what I mean? Like accepting responsibility properly, not a politician's way. Like not, and I think it's one of those things like you want to. I was listening to the Basecamp guys talking about it, but he was saying when you screw something up and you have an outage and you're communicating with customers about it, you want to own it, like overcommit to it and say, this is like the end of the world, we really screwed up. And not caveat it and say, but, AWS went down and whatever. He was saying, if you overcommit to a thing like that, then people will then normally say, oh, it's not the end of the world. Whereas if you say, you were just like,
oh, this thing happened, no big deal. And everyone's like, well, it was a big deal.
It was a big deal to me, yeah. So he was basically saying that you have to completely and totally own it. I think that's more for like a PR thing, though.
Yeah.
Like when you're in a company, then it's your boss. And I think what me and my wife were talking about and what she suggested, which I thought was quite good, is to perhaps publicly, especially if you're in a company with other teams, publicly, I think you have one line, but to your direct boss or team, or almost on an individual one-to-one basis, you might have a different line. So she was sort of saying she would potentially admit blame much more openly in a one-to-one situation than in a broader situation. So she wouldn't broadcast an email being like, I messed up, what was I thinking? Or like, not what was I thinking, but she wouldn't necessarily say, look, I made a mistake, blah, 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 over a big email to a load of people. But if she met a boss one-on-one after it, because obviously like, they'll know there's been an issue, she'll have solved it, but she'll put a brave face on it to a wider group.
But it depends at the point that you're hiding what the issue was, right?
Yeah, it's more like not hiding it, but like spinning it. So I think for me, the more you spin it, so if you say, oh, this happened.
You could just not. I could agree with saying you're not going to apportion any blame. You're just going to a wide distribution. She could be like, this is the issue.
Facts.
Yeah, you could be like, this is the issue. This is what you're seeing. We found the reason, we fixed the reason, and we're going to work to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
You can leave it at that. I would agree that you, and I did say it, I think you're not going to be like to a big group of people, I screwed up, I only half-assed tested this, and, I
made a mistake.
Whoops. But, sorry about that. I agree, I wouldn't send that to a big list. And then, to your local team or whatever, you could say, look, actually, I did wrong. This test was wrong, or I actually just missed out a bit of this code. I didn't commit.
Yeah.
That's happened before, right? I do get that. But I would never hide from the fact. I would never hide from the issue. I would never try and sugarcoat the issue, which is different. I did wonder if that's what you were saying, but I would never say, "Oh, the issue isn't as bad as they thought." I would always just say, "Look, this is the issue you're seeing. There's this potential reason that we've now fixed. Let's see how it goes."
I think you're right as well. I said about apologising. I don't think I'd ever apologise.
Because I don't think you should.
No, you shouldn't. There's nothing to apologise. Like, people are going to make mistakes, and like you said, I think in the heat of solving an issue, you go with facts.
Yeah.
Like what went wrong, what you're doing to fix it. And then maybe afterwards you debrief and say how you're going to stop it happening again.
Yeah.
GitHub do
post-mortems
or what they call them, but
root cause analysis.
RCA. They do some brilliant ones.
Yeah.
But I think being honest in business, I don't know. Maybe I've not been in business or like at work long enough, but I feel like the more honest you are, at the right times, especially one-on-one. The way you can behave with people one-on-one is very different to in a groups or in a email or a place where it's going to be wider.
I think what's interesting about that is I think that could potentially affect the culture of the company. If you feel like individually you can say something that you could never say to a group of people, I wonder whether that's a problem.
Yeah.
So say, if we were in a team of 10, I could say to you, I've completely screwed this thing up.
Yeah.
But I fixed it and nobody really knew.
Yeah, why is that?
Whereas if we went to a stand-up and they said, what have you done today? I'd be like, well, actually, I found this issue that I've screwed up that fortunately hasn't impacted us, but I fixed. I don't think people would do the second. I think they'd do the former. They'd be like, tell their mate that they messed something up. I don't think they'd announce it, but I feel like that perhaps is an issue with the culture.
Suboptimal, isn't it?
Because it would be better just for everyone to be open about it.
Yeah, it would.
And it's similar with, particularly big organisations, you get people that we well know that, are just pen pushers. they're not actually achieving anything, but somehow they're always busy and somehow there's always something going on. And you're like, well, why don't you just be... I'm obviously that you're never going to be honest about the fact you're not doing any work, but it's most of those people, there's a lot of people that know that person isn't doing any work. And it's like, well, why are we all talking about it behind that person's back?
Yeah.
Why are we not in a situation or a culture where we can either tell that person or we can raise it to somebody and they can maybe have a one-on-one with them?
Culture at work is tough, isn't it?
And it's all those sort of things that you've seen and you're like,
Yeah.
why are we letting this happen?
Yeah, weird behaviours start to emerge when you...
And I think those are some of the weird ones that you're talking about. You know, those things that I described there, those all happened in the big investment bank that I was saying the culture was quite, forced upon you. Yet there's these weird things that are happening that you're like, well, that's not right.
Yeah, like weird suboptimal. It's kind of, it's very, very strange. I don't really know why those sorts of things happen, but they just seem to, they do happen.
We've actually spoken about this topic a lot longer than I thought we would, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it will never be broadcast.
Yeah, maybe we'll cut some
the beginning half, I'm a little bit nervous about.
I don't feel like anything we've said is bad. Some of it might be controversial, or some people might say that's not the right thing.
Yeah.
But hopefully they can understand. You can understand why they are the way they are.
We are definitely not experts on... Because I feel like there are people whose job it is to talk about, especially some of the more sensitive issues we talked about in the first half, and they actually... There's a party line almost on what to say and what isn't okay. Like, they know...
But I feel like we shouldn't suppress what people are thinking, because if there's a party line, that means that whatever the real thing is, people don't want to say. Because a party line implies that we've got to say this thing.
It's not necessarily a party line, but it just becomes like there's certain things...
That you're supposed to say.
That you're supposed to say and certain things you're not supposed to say. I guess it's like political correctness, basically.
Yeah.
But we have not necessarily applied all of our political correctness. But
I would hope that we'd just been honest about our observations and our opinions on it but happy to understand that they could be incorrect or not where we should be thinking.
Well, Philippa, if you're listening, hopefully you're not too offended by some of the stuff I said earlier on. That's quite convenient, having a name that goes both ways.
Philip and Philippa.
Philippa.
Is his wife called Philippa? That would be unbelievable.
I assume not.
I don't think you could be like, we can't date. How would you like to end? What's your phrase for today? How would you say on the exit scale?
I don't actually know what they all mean, but I'm going to say...
Well, let's just say the bigger the number, the worse you think it is?
Yeah, I think because of the editing job that I've got in front of me, I'll give it an exit 3.